Um, I am just going to say, on the way here, I was telling my caseworker that I kind of feel like an imposter because my story's a lot different from hers and a lot different from a lot of people's, but I'm going to tell it anyway. So 8.5 years ago, I met my soulmate, my abuser. 8.5 years ago, I walked into a local gas station for my morning caffeine intake, and all of the old men who hung out in there had been telling me about this guy that I just had to meet, and I didn't want to, but I met him that morning anyway, and I knew he was the one. Within days, I was head over heels for this man. He was everything I dreamed of and everything I'd been praying for. I wanted a man who was kind, understanding, trustworthy, compassionate, honest, and just deeply good. I wanted a man who loved Jesus, and it showed, and it did at first. It was a whirlwind of a romance. We met in February and got married in May. And I'm just going to read you a small part of my journal. My first counselor with the Choctaw program, I saw her, Stephanie. Hi. She told me to do this. So I'm just going to read a little bit of it to you. It says, I'm told that I need to journal about all the negative things I've gone through on account of Bo in order to keep from romanticizing our marriage. So I guess I'll start from the first moment I truly felt maybe I had messed up. I was working as a drug and alcohol counselor after having a super sudden life experience being married to an addict. My learning from that helped me to easily be able to get that job. Just right at a year after we met, I remember being upset, not knowing what was going on with him. He had just gone crazy. Money was going missing. He was lying all the time. He would get up and leave in the middle of the night, sometimes taking with him all the money I had. This day in particular, he had told me while I was at work that he needed to talk. I was sure he was cheating on me or something, so I hurried home after work, beyond anxious to hear whatever this devastating news was going to be. I waited for hours for him to come home. He wasn't working, had no job, he wasn't obligated to be anywhere else. I'm not even sure now what time it was when he finally showed up. It was late, I believe after 9 p.m. He sat down at the kitchen table and started stacking, unstacking, and restacking his coin collection. Those stupid coins. Almost always a sure sign he had used Xanax. He finally spoke and said to me that marrying me was a mistake, that his heart was still with his kids and their mom, and he wanted a divorce. I was stunned, completely and totally shocked. We were in love, and I just knew he absolutely could not mean what he was saying. I remember calling my mom because I just couldn't believe what was happening. I'd stepped outside to do that, and when I came back inside, he was still just completely emotionless. I just knew there must be something else going on. His phone, little flip phone, was sitting on the corner of the table, and I knew I had to look in it. He kept saying he wasn't high, and he meant what he said, but I wouldn't accept that. I grabbed his phone to look for proof that he'd gotten some sort of substance from someone somewhere. In my mind, that had to be the only plausible explanation. I just wanted proof. He didn't like that at all. The next few minutes, maybe seconds, happened so fast. I remember him lunging for me as I tried to open the phone. I remember sinking to the floor trying to get away. I remember being slammed into the kitchen cabinets when I was back on my feet, and he put his big, strong carpenter arms around my neck and he squeezed, and it hurt. I finally got out and ran to the end of the hall where my 6-year-old son was in bed in his room. I shut the door and locked it, knowing he could easily bust through the door if he wanted to, and I called the cops. They found syringes in his pockets. At some point during our altercation, he had also flipped the kitchen table where all of his coin stacks were. The corner of the table broke. His bottle of Dolce & Gabbana Light Blue had gotten broken when it hit the tile, the cologne he bought shortly after we met because I told him I like how it smelled. When the cops arrived, he was obsessively restacking his coins. He mocked them as he came in. He ridiculed them for sending so many officers. I'm going to skip through part of it. That night, as I sat at my now broken kitchen table, I sat across from Officer Sprayberry, doing my best to write a police report that made sense. While I wrote, my phone rang, and I ignored it. He left a message. He let me know this was all my fault, and he was out the next day. The cops told me to file a protective order, and I did, but every time I was away from my house, he broke in. He went through everything. I couldn't say for sure which things he did before that night and which ones were after, but my guitar went missing, my keyboard disappeared, my filing cabinet was broken into. He even ripped my son's teddy bear open, thinking maybe I'd hid some of his drugs in there. He stole money from my son, and you know who his family was mad at when I called the cops? Me. They blamed me for years. His mother told me I shouldn't have grabbed his phone and I shouldn't have called the cops. So you know what I did the next time? I didn't call anybody. And I keep thinking back to the very beginning, like, how did I get here? I was so raw and open and honest. I remember knowing and insisting on being my true self, quirks and flaws and all. I told him I was weird. I told him I was messy. I was terrible at housekeeping. I wanted to be loved, and I wanted to be truly loved for who I am. He told me all about his kids and how much he loved them and how awful his ex-wife was and how she was such a horrible person. And he made absolutely sure I wouldn't like her. And I didn't. I couldn't. The version of her that I was given was awful. I very distinctly remember him telling me how she lied to him and about him, how it bothered him so much that she would call her mom or her sister every time they had a problem, and he hated that. He needed to be sure that I knew not to do that. I agreed because I knew a marriage involving so many people would fail. I knew that telling the people who loved me my whole life the wrongs committed by a partner only creates more problems because those people can't just let go of that information and forgive the person who hurts their loved one. They hold on to it forever, so I didn't. I called my mom when he choked me that first time, but not the second time. I didn't tell them how I was supposed to leave work early one day to meet him to go file our taxes, and how I pulled up to his parents' house and he accused me of cheating on him and sent me to town to get printouts of our phone bill, only for me to return to the house to realize he was hiding a girl in his parents' house from me. I didn't tell them how I saw her shadow under the door and tried to go look, and I didn't tell them how he assaulted me to protect her. I didn't tell them how he choked me again and literally threw me out the door of his parents' house by my neck. I didn't tell them how my neck and jaw hurt for days after that, or how I would wince every time I forgot and tried to rest my head on my hand at my desk or at work. And of course I didn't call the cops. He hurt me in every way that day, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell them about the night he got mad at me and slammed my head through our wall. I lost a deposit on my house that day, from that house, because of that hole in the living room wall. I didn't tell them about our first Christmas together when he bought me a cheap necklace from Walmart and put it in my wedding ring box to try to act like it came from Zales. I didn't tell them how I didn't complain, only questioned why Zales would put a necklace in a ring box, and I didn't tell them how he lied and said that Zales had run out of necklace boxes. I didn't tell anyone how much that hurt me, knowing that was a lie, but not wanting to hurt his feelings or make him feel inadequate. And I didn't tell them how he got furious anyway, called me ungrateful and selfish, and took the necklace back to Walmart and got a refund so he could buy drugs, and I didn't get anything for Christmas. I didn't tell anyone about the night he screamed at me for not agreeing with him about some religious thing, or how he got so angry about it he threw a Bible at me, and I didn't tell them how he threw it so hard there were still black streaks on the wall where it hit. I didn't tell how he shoved me while I was holding our little girl and he pushed me so hard her head slammed into the wall. But she still remembers. I didn't tell him about all the times I woke up in the middle of the night and he was gone. I didn't tell them about all the times I woke up to realize he was gone and so was all my money. I didn't tell him about the time he left and I left and went to his mom's house and he called and told me if I called the cops he was going to kill himself. I didn't tell, but he did. He lied to everybody. I struggled for 8 years to understand why his family didn't want me around, why his kids always seemed to not want anything to do with me, why they all treated me like I was some awful person. And then he finally admitted to me a few months before our relationship ended that it was all his fault. He had lied to every single one of them about me. His aunt accused me of lying about our daughter being his. His cousin griped at me for telling her husband happy birthday because she said I was flirting. He admitted they all had been told lies about me by him, but he never stopped lying to them. And I'm going to stop reading my journal right there. Just keep going. At first, telling the story was embarrassing to me. I did not and do not want to be called a victim, but I am a victim. I've been a victim of domestic violence, and I've been a victim of every bit of manipulation and abuse that goes with that. And I'm going to tell my story. Many of you here today may be asking yourself, if he was doing all of this to her, why didn't she leave? Why didn't she tell anyone? I know you guys all already know. The list of reasons is long, but for starters, I found out while he was incarcerated that we were expecting a child together. Then I lost my job. But our kids were going to get a sibling, and as scared as I was that I might have to do this alone, I prayed and begged God to let him come home and not be sent off to prison. So with 6 felony charges, he was home in just over 3 months. My little boy was thrilled to have his dad back when he came home. I was thankful to finally have my husband home, and life went on. Things were good, stressful but good. We moved into a different house. My husband was assigned a PO. I drove him to all of his appointments 45 minutes away. We both found jobs. A couple of months went by and he was sent to a 30-day rehab program. My son and I were on our own again. But I couldn't leave because I couldn't break up my family. I couldn't afford to do it by myself, and I couldn't get divorced again. I found out my baby was going to be a girl. He came back home, he started his new job, and he was out of town a lot, but worked for a guy from church, so I figured he'd be okay. I gave birth the next January. Things seemed pretty good. I continued to drive him to see his PO. Our daughter would go with us, and she would go to work with me every day. We took our first and only family vacation. We did things around our house to make it a home, and it seemed good, until it didn't again. I began noticing he was using again. He'd never admitted, of course, but I could tell. We had done this enough by this point that I could tell. Plus, I had now spent a year as a counselor in an inpatient rehab facility, so nobody was gonna pull one over on me now. And when you fall asleep with your face in your Fruit Loops and try to tell somebody you're not high, anyways. Every time I knew he was using, I made him leave the house. He would start fights, blow up at me and fly off the handle, and then he would leave again. One night I couldn't sleep, always afraid of him showing back up. We live on a dirt road with 5 houses on it, so at 3 a.m. when I saw headlights rounding the corner, I jumped out of bed to look. It was him. He parked out in the field in front of our house. I have no idea what he was doing or trying to do. All I knew was that I wanted him to leave. I walked towards the vehicle so that a tree was directly between us, blocking his view so he couldn't see me. And just as I got to the tree, I came around it, and I remember his face. He threw gravel getting out of there. And I still don't know what he was doing, but I called his uncle, who told me if he shows back up, call the cops. He never came back that night. Soon his PO called me about a 13-month rehab facility 4.5 hours away. My husband had lost his job again. Money was missing from all over the place. He stole from stores, never got caught, but he stole a lot of things. He admitted to cheating on me. He hated me. I prayed this rehab would be the thing that would save him, save us. So when it came time to drive out to the Sunrise Ranch in Cache, Oklahoma, he had said his mother would take him. He always wound up back with his mom and dad when he was using because they enabled him terribly. I took my daughter to see him the night before he was scheduled to leave, and he asked me to drive him instead, and of course I agreed. He binged like crazy, just like any addict will do the day before they go to rehab. I showed up early the next morning with his bags packed and ready with everything he would need, and we headed off. I still remember that drive and how hard it was. He was so mean. But I knew I just had to get him to Cache. So no matter what awful things he said to me or about me or accused me of, I just had to be quiet. And if I made him mad, he might not go get the help he needed, so I was quiet again. During his time in rehab, I got incredible letters from him. The longer he was there, the better I believed things were going to be. He was at a Christian facility. He was speaking in churches, giving his testimony. He was clean and sober. He was going to be a great husband and dad when he got back. I got letters every week about how things were going to be different and better. And they were for a while, until they weren't again. We had highs and lows, and I tried to tell myself it was normal stuff. All married couples deal with this, but abuse should never be considered normal. If my thoughts or opinions on anything were different from his and I spoke to that, a fight ensued. I was always gentle with my words, but there would still be harshness and brashness and anger, shouting, slamming, throwing. I started having so many health problems. In March of 2022, I ended up being diagnosed with cancer. I drove myself to my first infusion appointment where I went into anaphylactic shock. I drove myself home. I drove myself to oncology appointments. I drove myself to my next infusion appointment where I had yet another allergic reaction, and I drove myself home again. I drove myself to radiation appointments. I drove myself to chemo. Near the end of May, I got so sick I couldn't drive myself that far anymore. I stopped at his work right down the road from my own work on my way to my radiation appointment because I needed to throw up. So he had his oldest daughter drive me, but he didn't. The next Monday, I asked my 13-year-old son to ride with me so I wouldn't be alone. That day at radiation, the tech asked me if oncology knew how sick I was. I said, "It's chemo, we're all sick." I was so miserable. I was ready to die. I knew that if chemo was this bad, I couldn't do all the treatments they intended for me. 2 days later, I was rushed back to the hospital. One of the nurses told me I was towing the line where they couldn't bring me back. I was on that deathbed for 10 days, and praise God, I'm still here today. For 6 weeks, my abuser came home from work and injected the tubes in my arm with strong antibiotics, and I bragged on him to everybody for doing it. The bare minimum, really. When it came time to start back to chemo, I drove myself. One time he drove me to see my surgeon in Little Rock. One time, because my mom insisted. He was cold to me all that morning and made it clear he was unhappy having to go, and I was miserable all day, feeling guilty that he had to take me. I finished chemo the second day in November. All 4 of our kids had been living in our home with us for several months by that point. We had a lovely holiday season. Christmas morning, all 4 kids woke up and opened presents with us. As I went to make our big breakfast before his 2 oldest had to leave to visit their mom, I was confronted by his daughter, who callously let me know I'd bought a few things for her in the wrong size. And I apologized, and she said, well, all you had to do was ask. After years of throwing them parties, making their dinners, buying everything they needed, making sure every holiday and birthday was extra special, going to all their games and events, I still couldn't do anything right. I was feeling devastated and hopeless, and as I stood there making homemade gravy, my eyes were just filled with tears. He came into the kitchen and saw me being emotional and got angry. This time he went off on her. He screamed at her, he cussed at her, and now she and I were both sobbing. He took her to her bedroom where he scolded her more. They talked. He came back to the kitchen and sternly informed me that I was to go to her room and act like an adult. So I did. He scolded us both and he left us in the room. I hugged her, apologized to her, told her I loved her, and went back to finish making breakfast. Manipulation. I became the problem to her because I was blamed for his reaction to her. His son moved out soon after, and in February his daughter got angry at me and moved out as well. On March 24th, I told him I was really struggling with the way things were going. I told him I was hurt by his daughter acting as though I could just be thrown out like garbage. She moved out and had never spoken to me again, not one word. I became public enemy number 1. I'd started having a glass or 2, sometimes 3 at night, just one. But after losing so much weight during my illness, being on so much medication and everything else, it didn't take much to get me, silly. I'm being transparent, okay?
Okay.
So I take full responsibility for that. However, I also became the scapegoat. The kids moved out because of me. Everyone was miserable because of me. I was miserable, but I couldn't even be me anymore. March 25th, he yelled at me about how his relationship with her had never been the same either. He told me I was so selfish and I only ever cared about my own feelings. I knew that wasn't true, was it? But I went out of my way, bent over backwards, trying to make sure everyone else was happy. After all, that was the only way I could be happy, right? He asked me if I'd ever thought about fixing it. I thought, well, I'm an adult. Sure. I sent her a message apologizing for how everything had turned out, telling her if she wanted to be angry with me, okay, but I didn't want her to be angry at her dad. He didn't do it. She told me her relationship with her dad was just fine. They hang out every day for hours. They go to lunch. They drive around together. Wait, what? That's not what he just told me. So I showed him her message. That's when he started blowing up my phone. He was so angry. He was livid. He was screaming. I had never heard him so angry. I'd never heard him scream so loud. I had no idea what I had done wrong. I did what he had just told me to do. Why was he so mad? I kept hanging up on him because I knew I didn't need to be yelled at this way. Even when I would text him and say, I will not be screamed at like this, he sent a text back saying he wouldn't scream at me, just answer the phone. So I did, and within seconds, he was back to screaming. I cried all day. I did take our littlest to her piano festival where I sat and cried in the corner till she was done and we could leave, and I cried when we got back home. I tried to relax, took a shower, put on clean clothes. I had shingles all over the whole left side of my body and was already in a lot of pain. But when he got home from work, he was still really angry, and I still couldn't understand what he's even mad about. I wanted him to explain that to me, tell me why he was mad when I just did what he told me to. He stood on our front porch and yelled at me to go die. I wanted to get away from him. I walked up the steps to go inside. That's when he chest bumped me so hard, I flew up into the air and landed on my back on the ground. Keep in mind, I was only about 5 months out of chemo, so I was still really weak. He continued to attack me, yelling expletives, "Get the F up," as he yanked me back off the ground, and this time it was all caught on camera. The security cameras that I had bought, that he was mad that I put up, caught him. I knew I still loved him. I knew this wasn't okay, but I wasn't quite ready to throw in the towel. I'd been fighting so hard for this marriage for so long. We were just gonna have to get through this too. But then I watched that video, and then I watched it again, and then I watched it again, and then I sent it to some other people. At first by accident, but then on purpose. And there were people who needed to know who this man really is. I was one of those people. I needed to take a good hard look at the man I was actually married to. My best friends saw the video. One of them works for Choctaw Nation as a counselor, and she didn't push me at all, but she did get me in touch with the domestic violence program, just in case I was interested. A day hasn't gone by I haven't thanked God for Amanda, my caseworker through the program. Our first call, she said, "Tell me the story." And as you can tell, it takes me a long time to tell a story. But she listened to the whole thing. And she let me tell her all about how great he had been and how he'd shown up to my work with sushi for lunch as a surprise, and he'd give me meds during cancer treatment, and he'd been to rehab and jail during our marriage, and how his granny had passed away, and how my grandmother had passed away, and how we'd blended our families and we had a baby together, and how these 8 years really felt like more like 40. And I cried to her, this kind woman I had never met, on the phone. And Amanda said, "You ever heard of trauma bonding?" I have that word in a huge box on my paper where I'm taking notes, and it's outlined just over and over and over. So when I was still trying to figure out what I should do, we had a house together. We had our bills split up. We have kids. He made promises to me that he was going to remodel our house, and this house he was going to build me in a few years, and I really wanted those things, and he was going to take me on these big trips, like my first honeymoon, because I've been married twice and I've never had a honeymoon. How that works, I don't know. But I wanted all of that to come true. So I kept rewatching that video, and I looked in the mirror at the dark bruises and scrapes covering my backside. I cried all the time. It was painful to try to even smile. He said I was trying to make him look like a monster. He told me he didn't have any love left for me anymore. I had done too much wrong to him. Yet he still couldn't tell me what I had done. Everything he said I had done was stuff he had done, not me. I was so confused, nothing made sense. My world was hurtling into darkness. I would break down walking down the hall in the middle of the day. I felt so lost and so in limbo. I had loved this man so hard, so long. I had loved his children. I had done everything I knew how to make everybody happy, and I still couldn't do it. They had become my whole identity aside from being an art teacher. So who was I supposed to be now? Then I finally decided the marriage had to end. I watched that video again and realized if someone did that to my little girl, there may be a search for his body. For legal purposes, I am being sarcastic. I couldn't let her grow up watching her mommy act like this was okay, and I couldn't let my son grow up believing this was acceptable behavior. So Amanda helped me file for divorce. We got hooked up with legal aid. I was assigned an attorney. That's where we ran into another little valley. The original attorney I was assigned through legal aid had no interest in actually helping me. He was rude and hateful to me, spoke to me like my abuser. He told me if I didn't like what was going on, he could fight it, but my husband's attorney was just going to drag me through the mud, and he never even watched that video. He said the other attorney was going to say I beat the hell out of him. I had slapped him, trying to get away, trying to defend myself. So then I was scared. Was I wrong for that? So I was quiet again, and he got joint custody. When the state arrested my abuser on battery charges, he was bailed out within minutes, $1,500 cash. From the same uncle who had told me to call the cops if he showed up again. $1,500 cash to get him right back out. That uncle, who had been robbed by my abuser at 4 of his stores, the uncle who performed our wedding ceremony, the uncle he would listen to more than anyone else, the uncle who made him manager of the same stores that he had robbed. After a few weeks passed, that uncle asked me to come to his bank to speak to him. He asked me what I wanted. I was stunned. What do you mean? I thought I was going to grow old with this guy. That's what I wanted. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that not being the case. But he wanted answers. So I said I wanted my child. I wanted peace for me and for my kids. I really couldn't think of much else at the time. He said he hadn't watched the video and had no intentions of doing so. Of course. He told me he could convince my abuser to agree to every other weekend visitation, leaving me with the house and whatever else, but only if I would sign an affidavit. If I would sign an affidavit asking the DA's office to drop the charges, he would convince him to give me basically what I wanted out of the divorce situation. He told me prison time wouldn't do anyone any good financially. I explained that wasn't really my concern. I'd made it without him plenty of times before, but he knows my abuser is good at managing his stores and makes him a good profit. It was in his best interest to keep him out of jail. I knew it was in my daughter's best interest to ensure she would be with me the majority of the time. By this time, Amanda and a few others had fought for me to have a new attorney. My new attorney was ready to fight for me, but also made sure I understood that we couldn't undo what the first attorney had already done. So the domestic violence wasn't even presented as an issue previously, so it was kind of just off the table. With the help of my caseworker and my attorney, we decided the best option would be to sign the affidavit with attached stipulations. It was really the best we could do. I'd also asked a judge about the affidavit and was told the DA could still opt to continue charging my abuser even if I signed it. The state was who had pressed the charges originally anyway, not me, so I was hopeful. He'd gotten away with so much. This time he was caught on video. How could they not continue with this? So at this point, I still don't know what they're going to opt to do. I've met with our DA's office several times. I've been told they'll not pursue because the signed affidavit would cause them to lose. I've been told they still have to think about it. I've been told they thought I wanted him to have all charges dismissed, and I still have no idea where they got that idea. At one point, Amanda and I both went several weeks without hearing back from the DA's victim advocate, and it wasn't until the morning of his hearing that I was finally able to reach her. She told me they all thought I wanted the charges dropped. I said, "Are you serious?" No, I don't. I want him to be accountable for something once in his life. I met with them again, explained I felt coerced signing the affidavit because there was a solid chance he could get joint custody if I didn't. My daughter is 6. She has nightmares. She has major anxiety. She has PTSD. And she's scared when she can't see or hear me at home because I might be getting murdered. Someone needs to answer for that. So I'm in counseling now. My daughter's in counseling. We're still trying to get my son into a good one. And I might be a victim of domestic abuse, but I'm a survivor. I survived cancer. I survived an infection that was shutting down my entire body. I survived domestic violence. And many of you are here today because you are also survivors. My challenge to you today is to make something of your life and of your survival. You may be a victim, but you have a chance to be a survivor instead. You fought to be here, so you're a warrior. Fight to find yourself again. Fight for your independence. Fight to be who you're meant to be, and don't let yourself stop at victim. Keep going. Find ways to be a light in another woman's darkness. It takes time and effort, but it's so worth it. For me, I'm in a recovery program for codependents for women who've been cheated on by their partners. I'm working tirelessly at my job. I help my friend at her coffee shop, sometimes on the weekends. I make memories with my kids. Like 2 weeks ago, we went rock climbing for the first time. I'm back in grad school finishing my LPC. So just remember, you are strong, you are capable, you are fierce, you are a fighter, and you are worth it. I've struggled with what I'm supposed to feel. Is he wrong? Oh yeah. Do I still love him? Yes. And I always will. And my counselor said I have permission to feel both. If you're not here as a victim or a survivor, please be a warrior. Stand alongside these women and fight for them. When we have moments of weakness, lift us up. When our voices are being silenced, shout for us. When someone is refusing to fight for one of us, or when we are struggling to continue to fight for ourselves, join our fight and stand in for us. The system is horribly broken. And as was mentioned earlier, Oklahoma does have the highest rate of domestic violence in the U.S. And we have to work together to fix it. If people continue to get away with this, why would they stop? I found a quote I just wanted to share by Elena Sharps. She said, "Reporting an abuser doesn't ruin their life. They did that themselves. Reporting an abuser doesn't damage their reputation. It makes it more accurate. Reporting an abuser doesn't hurt their family. It protects them from abuse. And reporting an abuser isn't gossip. It's integrity." We must fight for change. I know personally I am done being quiet. I'm a survivor, and I'm going to keep telling my story.